The three most important questions in life are why, and why. Because by the third why, you usually get the hard truth. My name is John Terrio, and this is my story. But this time, I'm not cleaning it up for you. This is No Version Left.
My mother died with a pride flag hanging in her hospital room. Almost 22 years earlier, that same woman told me I had to be straight until I was 25 if I wanted to live in her house. Both of those things are true. And maybe that's the hardest thing I've had to learn about the people we love. They don't always fit neatly into the version of them we created from our worst memory. My name is John Terrio, and this is No Version Left. In part one, I talked about the question that started following me after I came out. Who do I have to be allowed to stay? I didn't know it at 18, but that question was going to get into everything. Because after you've learned that belonging can have conditions, you start looking for the conditions everywhere. I was openly gay. I wasn't living some secret double life. But being out and feeling completely free to be yourself are not the same thing. There were still rooms I entered where I immediately started calculating. What can I say here? How much do I show? Do these people know? Do I care if they know? Should I correct that comment? Do I want this fight? Is this place safe? And eventually you don't even realize you're doing it anymore. You just become very good at reading rooms. Early in my career, I regularly worked in heavy manufacturing, very male-dominated environments. And there were plenty of people around whom I could be completely myself with. But there were other rooms where the comments started, the jokes, conversations where people assumed everybody listening was exactly like them. And sometimes I stayed quiet. Not because I had stopped being proud of who I was, but because somewhere inside me, I was still doing the calculation. What does being completely myself cost me here? I experienced it with extended family too. People who seemed uncomfortable simply because I was gay. I invited people to my wedding who declined and essentially told me they could respect me as a person, but not as a gay man. Think about that sentence. I respect you, just not this part of you. Except it's not a detachable part. You don't get to carve me into pieces and then congratulate yourself for respecting the pieces you approve of. At one point, a partner's family asked me to be a little less gay. Just tone it down. Don't show it quite as much. And that's the thing about these experiences. Most of them weren't somebody standing in a family room telling me to leave. They were smaller, quieter, sometimes almost polite. But the message underneath them sounded strangely familiar. You can stay, just maybe not as all of you. And that is a dangerous thing to learn, because eventually nobody has to ask you to shrink. You start doing it yourself. You anticipate people's discomfort. You soften, you edit, you calculate. And the original person who made you feel that way doesn't even need to be in the room anymore. You carry the rule in with you. For me, that rule started at 18. Who do I have to be allowed to stay? And eventually it had almost nothing to do with being gay. It became fear of rejection, fear of not fitting in, of relationships ending, of jobs disappearing. Fear that being too difficult, too loud, too honest, too much of anything could make somebody decide I wasn't worth keeping around. And that's a hell of a thing to carry when the person holding it doesn't even realize he's carrying it. There's something I understand today that I couldn't understand when I was 18. My coming out created a journey for my parents too. I don't say that to excuse what happened. I say it because it's true. The question I feared hearing, do you have a girlfriend? Who are you dating? What are people going to think? Became questions they had to navigate in their own way. They were now the parents of a gay son in 2004. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't understand it. Maybe they were worried about what my life would look like. Maybe they were worried about what other people would think. I can have compassion for that now. But here's something else I've learned. Understanding why somebody hurt you doesn't make it hurt less. Context is not an eraser. I can acknowledge their journey without pretending mine didn't happen. Both can be true. My parents loved me. My parents hurt me. My mother gave me an ultimatum that changed something inside me, and my mother changed too. Because years later, she stood beside me at Pride. I worked for a company that decided to participate in local Pride celebrations. I got involved, helped organize, participated. And my mother wanted to participate too. She was right there beside me, proud, excited. And I wish I could somehow take a picture of that moment, walk back into that family room in 2004 and hand it to the kid sitting there. I don't think he would believe me. That's her, that's mom. She gets there, not immediately, not without hurting you first, but she gets there. Her support grew beyond Pride. Things I posted, ways I expressed myself, even ridiculous things like people having opinions because I posted a picture wearing a thong bathing suit at a beach. My mother reached a point where she would defend me. And none of that means the past disappeared. A pride parade doesn't erase being kicked out. Support 20 years later doesn't magically heal an 18-year-old overnight. But there's the other side of that. Being kicked out doesn't erase the woman she eventually became either. And I refuse to flatten either version of her just to make this story easier to tell. Because that's not the truth. Truth is messier. When I moved back home during my mother's cancer battle, we had time. Not the kind of time you want, but time. And cancer is a way of stripping some of the bullshit out of conversations. We talked about things, the past, mistakes, pain, our lives. Things we never really resolved. Some conversations brought closure, some didn't. There are still things I wish had been different. There probably always will be. But something changed between us. During my mother's final year, occasionally I had to escape everything for a few hours. Maybe go on a date, and for a little while I was even seeing someone. And whenever we talked about it, my mom's response became very simple. I just want you to be happy. That's it. I just want you to be happy. It probably sounds like nothing, but to me it was everything. Because I could still hear another sentence from the same woman. Straight until 25. And now, 20 years later, there was no condition, no acceptable version, no requirement, just I want you to be happy. I don't think my mom knew every time she said those words what they meant to me, but I did. Then she went into the hospital, and even there, she wanted to mark things happening outside the hospital walls. Canada Day, Pride. So she asked for decorations. I went in and bought a Canadian flag and a Pride flag. She had both put up in her room. Near the end of her life, I had something else made. It was a shirt with rainbow letters on it. It said, "Free Mom Hugs." And she wanted that hung up too. Where everyone coming in could see it. And I've thought about that image so many times since she died. Because somewhere in that room were two versions of my mother. The mother who once told her gay son he couldn't stay unless he changed. And the mother dying beneath a pride flag with a free mom hugs shirt hanging nearby. Same woman, same son, different ending. And maybe that's one of the reasons this story is so difficult for me. Because if she had simply remained the person she was in that family room, anger would be easier. If she never changed, I could put that, what happened into a box, call it rejection, close the lid, move on. But she did change. And growth doesn't erase the wound. It just makes the wound harder to hate. Then something else happened during her cancer battle. A moment I didn't connect to being 18 until much later. We were with doctors discussing her treatment. There was a plan. The doctors agreed. My family agreed. Then my mother asked me what I thought. I said, no, it's not the right decision. There has to be another way, a better option. And when one of the doctors questioned me, my mother made her position very clear. We don't do anything unless John agrees, and we do what he says. That moment still gets me, because 20 years earlier, I stood in another room outnumbered. The people I loved were telling me what they thought was right for my life. And I said no, and I stood up. And I walked out. Now I was standing in a room full of medical professionals, telling them I thought they were wrong. Except this time, my mom was beside me. The same part of me that once made her afraid for my future had become the part of me she trusted with hers. I don't believe everything happens for a reason. I hate that phrase. Sometimes horrible things just happen. Sometimes people hurt us. Sometimes life is unfair. But I do believe we can decide what we build from what happened. And standing in that hospital room, I realized something. 18-year-old me hadn't only learned how to leave, he learned how to stand. Then came one of the most unexpected conversations in my life. It was before my mom was in the hospital. She was still at home and my sister was there. The three of us were talking about my life, the mistakes, the struggles, the things I wish I'd have done differently, the future. My sister and I love each other deeply, but we aren't normally the kind of siblings who sit around pouring our hearts out to each other. So when she said this, I wasn't prepared for it. She told me she had always been jealous of me. Jealous of me. I remember basically thinking, have you met me? Have you seen some of these fucking decisions I've made? The messes, the things that didn't work? Meanwhile, I look at my sister, her family, the mother she is, the wife she is, the teacher she is, the person she is in her community. And I'm thinking, what could you possibly see in my life you'd be jealous of. Then she told me. She said she was jealous because I had always been me, because I stood up for what I believed, because when something mattered to me, I was willing to fight for it, even when the cost was mine. When it would have been easier to disappear, I didn't. And I don't think she could have understood how deeply that landed, because for almost 20 years, I'd looked back at that 18-year-old kid and remember what he lost. His home, his security, his certainty that the people he loved would always accept him. My sister looked at that exact same kid and saw what he refused to lose, himself. And that's when something about this story finally changed for me. Because for almost 22 years, I've carried one question. Who do I have to be allowed to stay? I asked it at home, in relationships. I asked it at work. I asked it in rooms where I made myself smaller before anybody ever asked me to. I spent a ridiculous amount of my life wondering what version of me would make somebody else comfortable enough to stay. And now I realize that's the wrong question. The question was never, who do I have to be allowed to stay? The question is, why the hell would I want to stay somewhere that requires me to stop being me? At 18, they wanted a straight version of me until I was 25. Later, other people wanted quieter versions, easier versions that didn't make them uncomfortable. And somewhere along the way, I made some of those versions myself, trying to belong, trying not to lose people, trying not to let other people leave me. I'm done doing that. Because if I have to disappear for somebody else to stay, then they didn't want to stay for me anyway. And maybe that's what no version left means to me more than I realized when I named it. There isn't another acceptable version waiting in the back. There isn't a quieter one or an easier one. There isn't a straight until 25 one. I'm out of versions. This is it. The man who walked out of that house, the man who eventually walked back in, the son whose mother stood beside him at Pride, the son she trusted when she was dying, the brother my sister had apparently been watching all those years when I thought nobody saw anything worth watching, me. And if you're listening to this because you're trying to figure out whether you're ready to come out, I'm not going to tell you to do it right now. I'm not going to promise you that everything will be okay the second you say the words. I can't promise that. Your situation matters. Your safety matters. The timing matters. Coming out belongs to you. Nobody should get to decide when you're ready except you. What I can tell you is this. Somebody else's discomfort with who you are doesn't make who you are wrong. And if your experience isn't what you hoped it would be, there are people who understand. There is community. There are families we are born into and families we find. There are moms and dads standing at Pride events offering free hugs because they know somebody else's kid might desperately need one. There are people who have fought versions of this fight before you, and we're still here. At 18, I thought coming out was about saying I'm gay. Almost 22 years later, I know those weren't actually the most important words I said that night. The most important words were probably the ones underneath them. This is who I am. And when I was told that being myself meant I couldn't stay, I walked out the door. For years, I remembered that as rejection. Now I understand something else was happening too. I was choosing myself. And maybe that's what I want someone listening to this to hear. You don't have to disappear to deserve belonging. You don't have to make yourself smaller just to make somebody else comfortable. And you shouldn't have to become another version of yourself just to convince somebody to stay. There may be moments when being yourself is lonely. There may be people who need time to catch up. My own story proves people can change. But through all of it, there is one person you cannot afford to abandon: yourself. I may be on my last version, but this version has a hell of a lot of fight left in them. And if you're still trying to find the courage to stand in your own truth, you're not standing there alone. I spent years remembering the front door of that house as the place where I was rejected. I don't anymore. Now I remember that door as the first place in my life where I chose myself. I just didn't know that's what I was doing yet. And if being fully me ever cost me a place in somebody else's room again, I'll survive it. I know where the door is. I've walked through it before. My name is John Terrio, and this is No Version Left. And this one isn't leaving himself again.